Hi. Hola. Hola, future. Here we are on this warm and sunny day somewhere. It's got to be warm and sunny. I don't know where. Not here. Today's Tuesday. On Thursday. Oh, I know you have a midterm. And some of you will be here. So if Eric is your GSI, you'll be here, and otherwise you'll be in 10 Evans. And the format will be similar to what's online for the old midterms, particularly the fall 06 format. And we'll provide you with booklets that you take the exam in, so you don't need blue books, don't need calculators, no electronics. Don't have any questions? Colin. Yeah, bring in something wider. Yeah. So the question was, if you're in this room where these desks are so dang narrow, if you want to bring something a little wider to give yourself a little more writing space, that's fine. Just make sure that it's blank on both sides. Yeah. What's your name? So the review session's at the same time as section? Oh, so your 4 o'clock students want to know, where will you be at 4?
So I'll be in second.
Okay.
So yeah, you can call me and ask questions the first time.
Okay. So if you're in Andrew's 4 o'clock, he's going to do section at 4 o'clock. Yep. Nope. Other questions? All right. So topics: regional conflict leading to war. I'm not going to talk about war. Postbellum South and explanations for the slow growth in the South, and then 19th century Northern agriculture with lots of pictures. So here we go. I can't remember where I stopped on Thursday, so I might have done this first slide. When we talk about regional conflict and the regional conflict leading to war, we contrast 3 regions. One is the Northeast, the second is the Midwest, and the third is the South. In the Northeast, which is the industrial region, the growth in the Northeast, so the increases in living standards, have been based on expansions of capital per worker ratio. So the substitution of machinery for labor, increasing productivity in manufacturing, leading to increases in wages and incomes in the Northeast. There is no natural barrier to further increases in capital to labor, and so in theory anyway, the growth in the Northeast was unlimited. There was no barrier. It's going to contrast in just a minute. In the West, which was called then the North Central, but we think of it now as the Midwest, whatever, the Midwest, the Northwest Territory, the Midwest, where the hell are the farms? The past and future growth was based on high land to labor ratios. I did do this because somebody asked me about T after class. T, remember, is land and L is labor. And so the high land to labor ratio is the explanation for fast growth in the Midwest or the West. In the South, the growth had been based on high labor force participation rate. So L is labor, P is population, and all of this, you may recall, derives from our growth equation we had on the very first day or second day, which was that output per person is some constant A, which measures total factor productivity, times some function that combines capital labor ratios, land to labor ratios, and labor force participation. And economic growth then was due to increases in A, or increases in the quantities of those inputs, K over L, T over L, or L over P. So for the growth to continue in the South needed to be able to expand slavery. Slavery was critical to the growth of the South, and moving slavery west into those more fertile lands, the western alluvial, and the other areas where they could plant the upland cotton, was a critical part of further economic growth in the South. Yep, Peter. The increase, so let me make sure I got the question. So increase in L, which gives you given population, which gives you the increase in labor force participation, is going to, all else constant, decrease K over L, and decrease land to labor ratio. So for the South, there was not much expansion of capital, so you're right in terms of capital. The South was moving west, so they were expanding the land as they expanded the use of slaves. Because the only way they could cultivate that land, given that they were doing cotton and the cotton crop was not mechanized, was to have a slave labor force. All right, well, initially, migration. Migration is really important to understanding the rates of growth in the different regions. And there were some questions on Piazza about this, this chart. So what this does is it takes the different regions and subregions and looks at what's the average annual rate of growth of real income per person in the regions between 1840 and 1860. So for the North, which is the Northeast, New England, and the North Central region, so the what we would think of now as New England on through like Ohio, the overall growth rate was 1.3 for that region. But if you look at the 2 subregions, so we take the North and we divvy it up into its 2 subregions, we get 1.7 and 1.6% for the rates of growth. What's this one? These are all from 2 weeks ago. Hold on, I'm looking for the handout for this week. The handout for this week, there it is. Table 10 showed you which states are in which of these regions. So the Northeast, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then all of New England. The North Central was the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. So that's what we mean here by the North. It's in the table from last week's handout, which is also today's handout. How is it that the growth in the subregions is greater than the growth for the region as a whole? Well, there's a lot of migration that's taking place during this period, and this overall growth rate of 1.3% represents a weighted average. It represents something based on the weighted average, where the weights are determined by population. The population center is moving from the Northeast to the North Central over this period, 1840 to 1860, because of migration. So when we talk about migration, we talk about people moving into the United States. The bulk of the migrants who are coming in, there's a bunch of the Irish that come in, and yes, they settle in the Northeast. But then there's all those Germans that come in who are farmers, and they're going directly to the North Central because they want to be farmers. And so the population mass is shifting from the high-income Northeast to the relatively low-income North Central. And these overall income figures, the 109 and the 141, are weighted averages of the income figures for the Northeast and the North Central, where the weights depend upon the population. Since the population mass is shifting from the high income to the low income region, for the region as a whole, you get a lower overall growth rate, 1.3%, than you get within any of the 2 regions, 1.7 and 1.6. So here the migration is going to the lower income region because they're going not because they want to be lower income, but because they want to be farmers. And that's what they know. In the South, what's happening in the South? In the South, the migration pattern is moving from the South Atlantic and the East South Central to the West South Central. I'm not going to read all of those states, but the West South Central is Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. So those southern western states, I guess, those states that are in the western part of the South, those are the high income states. That's where the cotton crop is particularly fertile. That's where there are huge plantations, and that's where you have very, very high levels of income per capita. When the capita, by the way, capita here is including the free population, so the slave population is not part of the per capita. And the high growth rate, the high levels of income in the West South Central, what's happening there is the population is shifting, so the mass of the population is shifting towards this high income West South Central region over this period 1840 to 1860. And so for the South as a whole, the South's overall growth rate of 1.7% is higher than the growth rates in any of their regions because of migration. So what the table is showing us is the importance of migration west in the South for sustaining very high rates of income. That the South, if people were not able to migrate west, if they were not able to move cotton farming and cotton slave plantations west, then the South would not have had as strong of a growth rate as it did have between 1840 and 1860. So these are data that support what I said on the previous slide, that the move west of the cotton farming and the slave plantations was a vital part of the growth for the southern region. Initially, there are balances between these three regions, between the West, the Northeast, and the South. And these balances are over a variety of issues. Let me mark where my next slide is. There we go. So, I'll do this one. The South and the West are aligned against the Northeast in terms of tariffs. So the Northeast wants there to be high tariffs. They want there to be high taxes on imported goods because that's going to protect the industrial New England and the Northeast and allow them to have safer markets for marketing their goods, more profits for the manufacturing in the Northeast. The South and the West are farmers. Those farmers want to be able to export their crops because a lot of the cotton crops, 2/3 or so of the cotton crop is being exported, 1/3 or so of the wheat crop is being exported. And the farmers do not want the United States to have high tariffs because they worry that if the United States put high tariffs on imported goods, that there will be retaliatory tariffs that will slap tariffs on the exports from the United States, which are largely these agricultural products, and that would hurt the farmers in the South and the West. And so this creates an alliance in Congress. So this is all, think Lincoln again. This is all in Congress. This creates an alliance between the Southern and the Western representatives and senators versus the Northeast. On the other hand, on the issue of internal improvements, the Northeast and the West are aligned against the South. So who's going to pay for canals? Who's going to pay for railroads? Who's going to pay for improving roads? The Northeast and the West, they want to have government funding for improving the roads and improving the canals and improving the railroads. Because for the Northeast and the West, it's important to have a really good transportation network internal to the country for transporting their goods to market. The manufacturers in the Northeast want to have a really good transportation system for getting their goods throughout the United States. The farmers in the West want to have a really good transportation system for getting their crops to market and out of the country to the ports on the East Coast. The South, however, the South, why is it so humid in the South so many months out of the year? Because there's so many rivers in the South. There's so much water in the South that so many farmers lived already on navigable rivers in the South that they really didn't see the need for government to spend money to improve transportation when for so many of them they had right at their feet water on which they could put a raft, on which they could put cotton, flat boat, put their cotton and take their cotton down river and catch up with a bigger river, which catches up with a bigger river, which catches up with the Mississippi, and get their cotton to market in New Orleans. So this aligned the Northeast and the West against the South. On a third issue, which was land policy, initially we had the Northeast and the South. Sorry, can't read my own handwriting. Initially we had the West and the South versus the Northeast. And this is over how easy is it to get land. The West and the South, both based on farming, they both want there to be cheap land. The farmers want there to be cheap land so they can expand the size of their farm. The Southerners want there to be cheap land so they can migrate west and take advantage of these more fertile lands in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. The Northeast, on the other hand, they don't like the idea of cheap land because cheap land means that they have to raise their wages. When the land is pretty cheap in the West, then the opportunity cost for any given industrial worker of staying and working in a dark, dank, unhealthy factory in the Northeast, when they can get some land relatively cheaply and in some places simply by squatting, they don't have to actually pay for it, they just have to work it for 5 years and then it's theirs, then having the access to cheap land means that they're not as invested in staying and working in the factories. The factory owners have to raise their wages in order to keep the labor from migrating west to take advantage of the cheap land policy. And so this creates an alliance between the South and the West against the Northeast over the issue of land. Now, this alignment over land shifts as we get close to the Civil War. So around 1850, this alliance is going to shift. Question on the side. Yes. Yeah. So tariffs and land are the same alliance. Things shift in the period leading up to the Civil War because of changes in land and slavery policies. Let me show you some maps. There we go. So I can talk about the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Missouri Compromise was 1820. And in the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the issue in 1820 was that here they are, they're trying to figure out how to admit states to the Union. And remember, we've got a Senate where each state has 2 representatives, regardless of the size of the state. So Rhode Island has two members of the Senate, and California has 2 members of the Senate, even though we've got about 40 million people and they've got about 37 people, give or take. Maybe a few more. So regardless of the size of the state, in the Senate, everybody gets 2 senators. In the House of Representatives, you get the number of people your representatives in the House is proportional to your population. So as they admit states, the Congress wants to keep this balance in the Senate between the slave states and the free states. Because if they start admitting a whole bunch of northern states, then all of a sudden the Senate is going to tilt towards the people who are opposed to slavery. Or on the other hand, if they admit a whole bunch of southern states, the Senate is going to tilt towards the senators who support slavery. And so they want to come up with some scheme whereby they'll retain this balance of people who are pro-slavery and people who are anti-slavery. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 is part of that. In the Missouri Compromise of 1820, they admit Missouri, the state where Cahokia was, they admit Missouri as a slave state. Ooh, it's already in pink, so I'll put an S there for a slave state. And then they take Maine, which had not been its own independent state up until that time, and they admit it as a free state. And they establish a boundary. So this Missouri Compromise line of 3630, so the 36 parallel, 36 degrees, 30-something parallel, says above the Missouri Compromise, there will be no slavery. Below the Missouri Compromise, they can have slavery. Now, you'll notice that if you take this Missouri Compromise line and extend it west, it hits right about Monterey. So we're going to have a problem very soon here, right? Because California is going to become a state 1848, and California spans the Missouri Compromise line. That part of California is above that line, and part of California is below that line. So does that mean that California comes in as a slave state or as a free state? It's actually a debate that takes place before California is admitted, whether California is going to come in as a slave state or a free state. So then there's the Compromise of 1850. And the Compromise of 1850, which follows the secession of what's now Texas, the lands of what's now Texas to the United States, the decision is that California is going to come in as a free state, even though it spans this 3630 parallel. That Utah and New Mexico territories, which include what's now Utah and Nevada and New Mexico and Arizona, that these will be, as it says here, popular sovereignty. So people get to vote. When they come in as a state, there will be a vote, a popular vote in those territories as they become states. Do you want to come in as a free state or as a slave state? This is kind of odd because the Utah territory is north of the 3630 parallel and the New Mexico territory is south of the 3630 parallel. So now we've got a possibility of slavery ignoring that 3630 parallel. Hold on a second. At the same time, the Kansas and Nebraska territory, which is here marked as Indian territory, which also spans that 3630 parallel, which was established in the Missouri Compromise of 1820. At this point, that's an unorganized territory. At that point, it's labeled as Indian territory. We're going to come back to it in 4 years. Prithvi. No, that's Prithvi. I forget. Shrad. Yes, Texas. Patrick. Oh, he knows something about Texas history. Tell me again. So the Panhandle. The Panhandle of Oklahoma. Yep. Okay. So this piece right here that I just circled. All right. So what Patrick just said, for those who couldn't hear him, was that this piece here that I just circled, which is now part of Oklahoma, it's what's called the Panhandle of Oklahoma, was originally part of Texas, but because it was north of the 3630 parallel, it would have prevented Texas from coming into the country as a slave state, and therefore Texas ceded that portion of land to Oklahoma, so that Texas as a whole state could come in as a slave state. Thank you very much. All of a sudden, there's 3 hands. So why didn't we just start out with North California and South California like they have in the Dakotas? I don't know. I missed that part of my California history in 4th grade. I don't know. I don't know how they determine the boundaries for the state. I don't know the answer to that. So I know that the eastern border is a river. The southern border is where Mexico ends and the United States begins. I don't know how they determined this line in particular. That's kind of your question, right? Yeah. Okay, so let me get to the other land. So then there's Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. So this is 1854, and in the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, the Congress decides that the Kansas territory, which is what becomes Kansas, and the Nebraska territory, which becomes, this is a whole bunch of states up here. So this is Nebraska territory, and then up here is North Dakota and South Dakota, and then we've also got Montana over here. That the Nebraska and the Kansas territories will be decided again by a vote. That these areas can decide, as they come into the United States, they can decide whether they're going to be slave or free. So now suddenly, we've got a country where it's possible, because of these rulings, that all of these areas are going to be able to vote, decide whether they're going to be slave or free. It's possible for slavery to expand throughout most of the country. It's going to be the men of voting age in the territories that are becoming states. So once they figure out what the border is of the territory where the state border is going to be, it's going to be the men of voting age who live in that territory. I believe that it's not just landowners. It's certainly just whites, though. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now what all of this has done is all of this has said now it's possible, depending upon how votes turn out, for slavery to expand into these areas that the farmers in what was formerly the Northwest Territory had assumed would be free land where slavery would not be allowed. And the farmers in what we think of as the Midwest, the farmers are concerned about this possible expansion of slavery. Perhaps they're concerned on moral grounds, and they're also concerned on economic grounds, because this expansion of slavery is going to impact their ability to be profitable farmers in the what was the Northwest Territories. Figure out what's coming up next. All right, and so then what we get the Dred Scott decision. So part of one of these previous things that I forgot to mention, part of the 1850 Compromise had been a much stronger Fugitive Slave Act, which addresses the issue of the Underground Railroad and says that slaves that are in northern areas who are caught must be returned to their owners. And then there's the Dred Scott decision, which comes up through the Supreme Court and is decided in the Supreme Court in 1857, about a decade after Dred Scott had first sued. Dred Scott was a slave, and the people who owned him had moved Dred Scott to the north into a free area, into Wisconsin, Illinois and Wisconsin. He lived in Illinois and Wisconsin, which are both free states. And so he sued for his freedom. And the case gets heard in the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court makes this decision and decides that Dred Scott is not free. That what matters is not where he lived, but the fact that he had been purchased as a slave in the South, in a state where purchasing slavery was a legal thing. And that if you buy property in a state where it's legal to buy property, and then you take that property across state lines, the next state cannot remove that property, cannot take that property away from you. That you purchased that property in the first state, and the purchasing means that you own it, and that gives you a property right. And so the argument was that Dred Scott was not a free man, despite the fact he had lived in a state where slavery was banned, that people could buy slaves in the South and move any place in the country with those slaves. Which means basically now slavery is legal throughout the entire United States. That if somebody wants to own slaves in Wisconsin, they go into a slave state, they buy a slave, they bring a slave back to Wisconsin, they work the farm in Wisconsin. And so the Dred Scott decision in 1857 basically legalizes slavery, not the purchase and sale, but the ownership, legalizes the ownership of slaves throughout the entire United States. And that means that these alliances fall apart, because now the land policy, the alliance over land policy had fallen apart with the voter sovereignty, and what we have is these alliances that had kept this fragile balance between the North and the South for decades fall apart once the land policy changes, and particularly once the Dred Scott decision says that slavery is legal throughout the United States. I'm not going to cover the war, because there's only so much time and I don't really like covering wars. But this picture shows you what happens. The South secedes. So the southern states leave the United States. That's going to be really important when we talk about things in the postbellum period. Because during this period when the southern states are out of the Congress, legislation can be passed by a majority of the members of Congress because the southerners are not there blocking things. And so we're going to see in the next part of the course, we're going to get some banking legislation, we're going to get some education legislation, we're going to get some land legislation. All of this stuff that had been blocked through this fragile alliance suddenly passes through Congress. The South secedes, there's a war, a lot of people die, there's some movies about it, you can watch them. The South paid for their part of the Civil War largely with money, which leads to hyperinflation in the South. There have been 2 instances of hyperinflation in the United States. One was during the Revolutionary War period, when we paid for the Revolutionary War soldiers by coining coins and printing money. And then in the South, from the Civil War, when they paid for 2/3 or so of